So the text leaks for Boruto are out. And usually I don't report on text leaks, but I know that other people are going to be reporting on text leaks here, so I'd like to get ahead of it. See, for those of you who don't know, a couple of days before the official release of Boruto's chapter, we'll get a sequence of leaks. Usually the first kind of leak we get is what's known as a text leak, or a written summary of the chapter that's about to come out. After that, we'll get things like raw leaks, which are just scans of the chapters, but in Japanese. And then finally, after a fair amount of zhuzhing and work, eventually we get translated fan leaks, which is kind of like the official release, except it's translated by fans instead of professionals. Now, usually it's that last level of leak that I wait for before I start reporting on things as important as new chapters of Boruto. However, these text leaks are out early, like 4 days before the official release early. And so I know a lot of other anime pages on this platform are gonna start reporting on these leaks 4 days before the official release. And thus, I'd like to give my 2 cents on what I believe is going down with very limited information in Chapter 18 of Two Blue Vortex, because it appears as though a lot is going down, and well, I kind of anticipated something like this occurring. This is not the way that I saw the battle between the Shinju and the Shinobi beginning. It seems as though once again Ikimoto has pulled the wool over my eyes and has pulled the story of Boruto in a somewhat predictable but very nefarious direction. See, because it appears as though that the deceivers have actually become the deceived in Chapter 18 of Two Blue Vortex. That the Shinobi who believed that they were going to be able to trick these two childlike entities into splitting up into manageable groups have actually fallen into a trap crafted by the Shinju. And this upper hand that the Shinobi were hoping to accomplish through the element of surprise may have been turned right back onto them, as Ryo and Matsuri were apparently playing the fool with the full breadth of knowledge that the Shinobi that were apparently trying to help them were actually just after their soul thorns. But what could this mean for the future of Boruto? Does it mean that Jura is actually just masquerading as somebody who likes Konoha to allow Konoha to let down their defenses and allow him into the middle of the city? Is the emotional state and memories of the people who are used to create these Shinju completely separated from their newfound forms? And does Konohamaru stand any legitimate chance in a battle against Matsuri? With the unfolding of all these events in Chapter 18, we have a lot of questions to answer. So with no further ado, let's get into Chapter 18 of Two Blue Vortex Explained. Kinda. But before we get to kinda explaining this upcoming chapter of Boruto, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Now, it's important to note here, guys, that I am going to be making an additional video about Chapter 18 of Two Blue Vortex when the official chapter comes out. That video will be coming out on the 21st. So if you want to wait for a fuller and more detailed breakdown, I would wait until then. However, if you're just itching to know what happened in Chapter 18, well, then I guess this is the video for you. So, Chapter 18 seemingly opens off exactly where Chapter 17 left off. That is in Amado's laboratory, where Kawaki has Amado pinned against a wall. However, apparently before Amado is able to release Kawaki from his limiters, Sumire walks into Amado's laboratory because, mind you, she works there, and sees Kawaki pinning Amado up against the wall and yells at him to stop. However, Kawaki obviously ignores her. He's not the kind of person to stop because Sumire asks him to stop, and instead Kawaki doubles down, once again demanding that Amado release his limiters. Now, Kawaki knows that the limiters are most likely tied to some kind of verbal code, because if you remember in Chapter 70, when Amado said there's no dress code to code, a release code of the limiters that Amado had placed on him at Jigen's demand. And while Kawaki wasn't there to see this, Daemon and Ada were. And while I'm not necessarily saying that Daemon or Ada told Kawaki that the way that Code got his limiters lifted is that Amado said some special phrase, it's not insane for us to assume that. It ties into the fact that Kawaki knows that a lot of the cyborgs have personalized sleep codes, and pretty much the only way that Amado is going to be able to lift these limiters that he apparently placed on Kawaki that overmaxed his defensive and regenerative capabilities while minimizing his offensive capabilities would come from some phrase that Amado would say that would probably have something to do with Kawaki's name like it did with Code. And therefore, Kawaki loosens his grip on Amado. However, instead of Amado muttering the phrase that was going to release Kawaki of his limiters, Amado, rather intelligently, just said Kawaki's sleep code. Now this is interesting, because this isn't the first time that Amado has put one of his cyborgs to sleep with a code. In fact, this pretty much confirms that every cyborg that Amado has created has a sleep code of some sort. A sleep code that, if muttered by Amado, will immediately force any of his creations into a forced slumber. Now, it obviously makes sense that if Amado had some kind of way to protect himself in this situation, that he would do exactly that. But this moment does raise questions about the events of chapter 70. See, because when Code came to Amado and slammed him against a wall, like Kawaki is currently doing, and told Amado that if he didn't get rid of his limiters, that he would kill Amado, and even if he did get rid of his limiters, he would kill Amado. Amado decided in that moment, instead of putting Code to sleep, decided to release Code of his limiters and then appeal to Ada's romantic side by telling her that he was her into Konoha and meeting Kawaki, which is very interesting when you consider the fact that Amado could have very simply muttered 3 phrases, one for Code, one for Daemon, and one for Ada, and slipped right out of that situation. Now, the other reasoning that we've had over the last couple of years as to why Amado wasn't able to put Code and Ada and Daemon into sleep like he is with Kashin Koji and Delta is because it was some flimsy logic that Kashin Koji was a clone and therefore kind of an android, and Delta is a full android. And therefore, as Kashin Koji and Delta were the most genetically augmented out of all of Amado's creations, it would make sense that they would have a code that would force them into sleep. While the others in Amado's creations, those being Ada, Daemon, Kawaki, and Code, the people who started out as regular people before Amado augmented them, wouldn't be able to be put to sleep because they didn't have enough cybernetic changes to their body, or something like that. However, now that Kawaki has been knocked out by Amado in this chapter, we don't really have a lot of explanation as to why the same thing couldn't have happened to Code, Daemon, or Ada. Sure, there's a possibility that you can say the only augmentation that either Ada or Daemon got from Amado was when they got a little bit of Shibai's DNA grafted into their body that eventually awoke them to the Shinjutsu that they currently have, as we've never seen Ada or Daemon do things like turn their hands into claws or add rockets onto their arms or legs. Things that we see from the likes of Code and Kawaki that seem to imply that they have shinobi cyberware. Shinobi cyberware that could most likely be used to shut them down if necessary. And thus, as to why Amado once again did not use a shutdown code against Code in chapter 70 raises a giant question mark. A question mark we're going to be answering the next time we upload on this channel after we break down the official release of the chapter, so make sure you're hitting that noti bell. Anyways, the chapter apparently continues on after Amado knocks out Kawaki, with Amado and Sumire sharing some small talk over Kawaki's unconscious body. And it's this point that we cut back to the Hidden Sand and Team 7 in 2/3. So the first thing that we see from Team 7 in 2/3 is that Sarada and Mitsuki are still leading Ryu towards Yodo and Araya. However, as Sarada and Mitsuki are leading Ryu seems to get suspicious of their intentions. And so, in this moment, he activates his Iron Sand ability. Now, unfortunately, I don't necessarily know the logistics of this battle, as the text leaks only say that Ryu activates his Iron Sand ability, and this right here is why I usually don't report on text leaks, because it's just not enough information. It's the spark notes of a chapter, and you really can't get the gist of what's going on based off loose summarizations. But it appears as though, based out of some form of suspicion, that Ryu has started the battle against Sarada and Mitsuki. Now, in the last video we posted on this channel, this is something that we hypothesized would happen. See, chapter 17 and the first official leak we got from the Boruto team of chapter 18 seemed to be cementing the idea that Matsuri and Ryu were sympathetic characters, that they had childlike ideologies that were incredibly multiple, and really Juro was to blame for any and all evil that they had ever once participated in. And thus, for the last month or so, we've all been kind of scratching our chin and tackling the moral question of would it be the right thing to destroy these two, which kind of ironically put Konoha on the wrong side of the moral equation. Now, unfortunately, we established in the last video we posted that the least interesting thing that could happen here is that Ryu and Matsuri start the combat against the shinobi. Because if Ryu and Matsuri paint themselves as the clear-cut antagonists of this story, well, that is pretty traditional storytelling, and it doesn't have to make us feel weird about any of our favorite characters in Two Blue Vortex. Unfortunately, it's about as paint by the numbers as you could get in terms of storytelling. To me, the much more interesting conclusion to this battle between Team 7 and 2/3 and the two Shinju that they're facing off against is that they go through with Shikamaru's plan, and they do truly have to grapple with the fact that these are childlike entities, but these childlike entities exist because the people that they love in Shinki and Moegi simply don't anymore. That is a hard moral question that Team 7 and 2/3 would have to grapple with. But we did acknowledge the fact that there was a solid possibility that Ryu would start some kind of combat against the shinobi that would kick off the war, and therefore the hands of Sarada, Mitsuki, and Konohamaru would be relatively clean of innocent blood. Now, this seems like one of the more likely outcomes of this chapter because Ryu was painted in a much more antagonistic light than Matsuri was in chapter 17. As Ryu, when he was walking with Sarada and Mitsuki, talked about how he was so happy that the two of them were nice to them because he was determined to destroy every shinobi he ever came across. And therefore, the idea of incredibly powerful and potent evil coming from this entity was placed right in front of us and made us grapple with the decision of, oh, is it okay to kill this child if we understand it's capable of great evil? However, the same could not be said for Matsuri, who we then cut back to after Ryu activates his Iron Sand supposedly at Mitsuki and Sarada. And this right here is where we get the first sneak peek page that we got from the Boruto official team. The page that shows Matsuri and Konohamaru talking to each other, where Matsuri is squirming and trying to figure out why she feels the way that she does around Konohamaru, and Konohamaru rather clearly grappling with the fact that this Shinju has feelings for him, and that this Shinju reminds him of Moegi, and the Shinju seems innocent. The Shinju is so innocent that it's grappling with the idea of first love and becoming more comfortable after talking to Konohamaru for an extended period of time. And the page we get after that sneak peek is apparently a flashback to when Konohamaru and Moegi were kids, which I'm assuming, based off what we know about Shinjus and their memories, is coming from Konohamaru's side of the equation, and thus this conversation that Konohamaru is having with Matsuri may be making him realize that he has romantic feelings for Moegi. And while that's all well and good, those romantic feelings for Moegi could absolutely bleed over to Matsuri, putting Konohamaru in a stickier and stickier, no pun intended here, you perverts, situation as he realizes, oh, I'm gonna have to assassinate and betray the trust of this relatively normal seeming girl who has a crush on me. However, it's at this point that the chapter changes, and very drastically, I may add, as it appears to be subconsciously or overtly, I can't say, once again, the text leaks are barely summarizations, revealed that Ryu and Matsuri know that the shinobi are just after their soul thorns, and thus Ryu and Matsuri were actually just pretending to be nice. Ryu and Matsuri seemingly knew that the shinobi would come for their soul thorns and pretended to fall into their trap, knowing that they'd be able to win the battles that the shinobi would split them up into. And honestly, in this assessment, they're not incorrect. See, I obviously don't know how powerful Araya and Yodo are, but Ryu was shown to be somewhere on par with Limitless Code. And while this battle will most likely reveal to us what Sarada's MS abilities are, we don't know exactly how much time Sarada has had to train with these MS abilities, or even if she's done it at all. We've also been shown that Snake Sage Mode Mitsuki is nowhere even comparable to Boruto in strength. So, while more likely than not, Sarada, Mitsuki, Araya, and Yodo will be able to clutch up a battle against Ryu, the splitting of Team 7 in 2/3 was not advantageous for Konohamaru at all. Matsuri, with a couple of modified claw grinds, was able to go up against Gaara, Shinki, Araya, and Yodo simultaneously. And Konohamaru does not match up to that spec at all, which is why the original plan from Team 7 in 2/3 was a surprise attack for Konohamaru to cut down Matsuri by leveraging her romantic feelings for him, and for the rest of Team 7 in 2/3 to cut down Ryu with a surprise attack and then go help Konohamaru in the ensuing battle against Matsuri. However, if Matsuri and Ryu knew that these shinobi were going to try and split them up and knew that a surprise attack was on the way, that knowledge actually puts Ryu and Matsuri in a way more advantageous spot after the split up. And this raises so many questions. One, it very clearly displays to us that the level of intelligence from Ryu and Matsuri, and probably from the rest of the Shinju, is much higher than Konohamaru, Kashin Koji, or anybody gave them credit for. They were able to identify the tactics of the shinobi, trick the shinobi into believing that they were able to trick the Shinju, split up in the way that the shinobi wanted, and then launch their own surprise attacks. But this immediately throws into question everything that Ryu and Matsuri have told us. It throws into question whether or not Matsuri actually has romantic feelings for Konohamaru or not. It throws into question what Ryu said in chapter 17 about Jura having a ton of respect for Konoha shinobi. It throws into question the very idea of Jura not wanting to destroy Konoha because he respects it as a place of science and learning. Everything we know about the Shinju has just been thrown out the window with this one subtle change. But it goes even further beyond that. The Shinju understanding exactly what the shinobi were trying to accomplish also throws into question a lot of what we understand about the 10 paths. Because we understand that this plan to trick Matsuri and Ryu into splitting up and assassinating them when they least expected was crafted by Kashin Koji through the usage of his ability, the 10 paths. So was Kashin Koji either deliberately leading Shikamaru to send shinobi into what could possibly be their death, or is a sequence of events that's currently unfolding highly unlikely? See, because here's the thing, this battle is probably going to pan out in the way of the shinobi. Ryu and Matsuri are probably going to end up dead, and that's going to be the first of the casualties in the battle against the Shinji. Kind of like Sasori, Hidan, and Kakuzu. And thus, even if Kashin Koji saw this that the Shinju understood that they were gonna be betrayed by the shinobi, but the shinobi still came out on top. This plan would still make a fair amount of sense to put into motion. But in order to guarantee its efficiency, why wouldn't Kashi and Koji tell Shikamaru and therefore tell the shinobi that are gonna go out on this mission, hey, the Shinju know it's a trap. And thus this really highlights the true weaknesses of the 10 paths technique. Being able to see infinite possibilities of the future is really just kind of intuition. It's undoubtedly the weakest kind of future sight you can have, but there is a legitimate possibility that in the same way that Boruto is walking a tightrope, avoiding the most disastrous futures for Earth, Gura is on the exact opposite tightrope, mucking up any possible good future that Kashi and Koji can see with his 10 paths. And thus, everything we know about the Shinju may be a lie. And that is absolutely something we're going to be talking about on this page, so once again, hit the noti bell. Either subliminally or blatantly revealed that Matsuri and Ryu are onto the shinobi. We cut back to Konoha, where Amado and Sumire are talking over Kawaki's body as he begins to wake up from his forced nap. However, Amado, Sumire, and Kawaki aren't the only people in this room. Nope. Akebi's there. Not Delta, the clone of Akebi, Amado's daughter. So no, he wasn't lying. And after Kawaki awakens, Amado, Sumire, and Kawaki seemingly have a somewhat long conversation about implanting Kawaki's karma marking on Akebi's body. And seemingly Kawaki, for some reason, doesn't want this to happen. And while there's no more information on why Kawaki doesn't want this to happen, I can venture some guesses here. See, if you guys don't remember, Amado's long plan with the recreation of the karma marking that he placed on Kawaki was that Kawaki would get the powers of Ishiki back because Amado is able to distill those and reverse engineer a karma marking that would essentially operate as a white karma marking. However, instead of Ishiki's personality in the karma marking, Kawaki would rather have Akebi's. Now, this is a really interesting situation. The idea here from Amado is that after Kawaki places this karma marking on Akebi, the karma marking will begin to express on Akebi's body. And as this karma marking expresses on Akebi's body, or possibly a Delta clone, either Akebi will come back to life and she'll have her personality because the karma marking will give it back to her, or the Delta clone will slowly but surely morph into Akebi. Because while Delta is a clone of Akebi, Delta doesn't have Akebi's personality. Now, the text leaks are saying that it's Akebi's body, which I find interesting because why make Delta then? And also the karma marking has never been stated to be able to bring people back to life. So I'm just gonna assume that they're talking about Delta here. But once again, this is why I don't react to text leaks. Now, as to why Kawaki wouldn't want to place a karma marking on a Delta clone, the answer to me seems relatively straightforward. See, the karma marking that Kawaki's using, even as the placer of said karma marking, doesn't technically belong to Kawaki. It contains the genetic information, the personality, and the memories of Akebi. So fundamentally, it's actually kind of Akebi's karma marking. Now, that's important, really important, because the rule of karma marking states that if there were multiple karma markings that belong to one person in existence, the second that one of those karma markings is used, all of the other karma markings disappear. And while technically the Ishiki/Akebi karma marking that Kawaki currently has is fully manifested, which makes Kawaki 100% a Notutsuki, as Kawaki wouldn't be a good vessel for the reincarnation of Akebi, fundamentally this karma marking on Kawaki just works like the white karma marking that Code had, except Code didn't get access to any of Ishiki's dojutsu or special abilities. But if this karma marking fully manifests on the likes of either Akebi's corpse or a Delta clone, then there's a fair to good chance that that karma marking will disappear from Kawaki's palm forever. But I'll have a better understanding of what's going on in this situation when the official release comes out, so if you're curious about that, watch the video that comes out on the 21st. We then cut back to Matsuri, who's apparently stopped blushing, and it's at this point that it is 100% solidified that yes, she was pretending, and yes, she's gonna try to kill and eat Konohamaru, and thus the very non-advantageous battle between Konohamaru and Matsuri has begun. Will it lead to Konohamaru's death? Maybe. Would that draw a direct line to Konohamaru's Sarutobi predecessor, Asuma? Yeah. Would it align pretty much exactly with when Asuma dies in the second part of Naruto? Yeah. Does Konohamaru stand any fighting chance in this battle whatsoever? No. But his death serve as the foundation of a spin the block type moment where Matsuri survives but Ryu doesn't and Team 7 comes together to kill her? Yeah, and as Kimono has full knowledge of the most popular moments in Naruto, and Shikamaru killing Hinata is one of the most popular moments in Naruto, would he try to recreate this? Maybe, but who's to say? I'm sure he'll be fine. Wink. Why can I never? A wink? Why can I never wink with the right eye? Anyways, we cut back to Ryu, who apparently takes out his soul thorn as bait, and it's bait that Yodo takes, as Yodo charges towards the soul thorn and tries to snag it. Yodo, mind you, is the girl in the Sand Siblings trio. I know, the relatively new characters, trying to remind you. Now, to this point that rather interestingly, Sarada apparently takes out her kunai and begins to rush towards Yodo. And it's roughly believed that in this moment that Ryu was using his iron sand to control Sarada, which is an interesting application of magnet release we've not really ever seen before. Like, yeah, it would make a fair amount of sense that a magnet release user would be able to sneak their iron sand or regular sand or gold dust onto somebody's body and use that to control them non-consensually. Kind of like a combination of chakra strings and magnet release, but like Bluetooth chakra strings, essentially. Which is ironically something that the Otsutsuki were able to accomplish with their moon puppets hundreds, if not thousands of years ago. And as the Shinju are pretty much Otsutsuki light, it's kind of cool that we're seeing this kind of thing happen. However, before Sarada is able to plunge her kunai into Yodo, a sword slash appears and it's revealed that Araya has severed the ties of sand between Ryu and Sarada. And thus the chapter ends with Araya chatting away with Ryu. Now, would I have loved to provide you with more context for what's going on in this chapter? 100%. But I'd like to try to cut through the noise of the amount of people that are going to do a bunch of very early and probably somewhat unjustified reactions to these text leaks. So hopefully for those of you who are just curious about what was going to happen in chapter 18, this was enough for you. But for those of you who want more, don't worry, there's more coming. But it appears as though the long wait for action we've been waiting for the last couple of chapters is done now, as the titular first real big battle of Two Blue Vortex is about to kick off. A battle that may not end as well for the shinobi as some of us are hoping. But I'm curious to hear from you guys. What did you think of this chapter? Are you excited about the upcoming battle? And do you think Konohamaru is gonna see the end of it? Let me know in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go on a run.